Hi everybody. Hi Paul. I itch. I can't take Benadryl.
We're at Schlitz-Audubon Nature Center. We're right on Lake Michigan. You know, when this was a forest in 1830s.
Nearly 6 months after losing the election, Donald Trump has struck again. His supporters have orchestrated the latest charade aimed at dismantling the single most important feature of our democracy, the right of voters to choose our leaders. That charade is now on display in Phoenix, Arizona, where, as you can see from these live camera feeds, a fake so-called audit is underway to recount the 2.1 million ballots cast in Arizona's largest county. And keep in mind that Arizona already had 2 full-on actual recounts after the November election. Well, this fakey version is costing taxpayers $150,000, with access seemingly only granted to the Trump-fawning news channel One American News Network, unless reporters agree to participate in the make-believe audit as observers. This is what happened when one of our reporters tried to gain access.
Hi, sir. How you doing? We're with NBC. We're hoping to cover as journalists what's happening here inside.
I'm not authorized to speak to the press or...
Are you with the audit, though?
I'm not authorized to speak to the press.
These guys said they would be able to talk to you about getting in as journalists.
There's a media area for media. We're going to be in that area only, not the building.
Trump lost to President Biden in Maricopa County, yet none of that matters to those committed to Trump's big lie. And that includes the very person hired to supposedly audit the ballots. Doug Logan, CEO of the Cyber Ninjas, who has reportedly advanced election fraud theories online. And yes, you heard that right. A far past the sell-by-date review of our presidential election is currently being led by a group called the Cyber Ninjas. You really can't make it up. And those Cyber Ninjas, well, they have tools in their Cyber Ninja kits, like ultraviolet lights, a feature Trump is particularly interested in, which should also come as no surprise, as his COVID quackery once included blasting the body with ultraviolet light from the inside as a way to eradicate the coronavirus. According to internal documents, these lights are being used to hunt for so-called, quote, fraud. concerned about Antifa attacks, they requested National Guard protection, which the Republican governor of Arizona, of course, declined. Now, this may appear as the last dying gasps of an election lie, but the consequences are actually quite real and dire, cementing a path that allows Republicans to baselessly contest any outcome that they don't happen to like. It's costing you money while chipping away at press freedoms. And that is why Trump and his cult members' ongoing effort to defile American democracy is the absolute worst.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.
Oh, please help me feel better, God.
Mitch and Chuck will understand it's good to be almost home. Down the hall. Anyway, thank you all, Madam Speaker, Madam Vice President. No president has ever said those words from this podium. No president has ever said those words. And it's about time. First Lady and her husband. Second Gentleman, Chief Justice, members of the United States Congress and the Cabinet, distinguished guests, my fellow Americans. While the setting tonight is familiar, this gathering is just a little bit different. Reminder of the extraordinary times we're in. Throughout our history, presidents have come to this chamber to speak to Congress, to the nation, and to the world, to declare war, to celebrate peace, to announce new plans and possibilities. Tonight, I come to talk about crisis and opportunity, about rebuilding the nation, revitalizing our democracy, and winning the future for America. I stand here tonight, one day shy of the 100th day of my administration. 100 days since I took the oath of office and lifted my hand off our family Bible and inherited a nation we all did that was in crisis. The worst pandemic in a century. The worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. The worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. Now, after just 100 days, I can report to the nation, America is on the move again. Peril and the possibility, crisis and opportunity, setbacks and the strength. We all know life can knock us down, but in America, we never, ever, ever stay down. Americans always get up. Today, that's what we're doing. America's rising anew, choosing hope over fear, truth over lies, and light over darkness. After 100 days of rescue and renewal, America's ready for a takeoff. We're working again, dreaming again, discovering again, and leading the world again. We've shown each other and the
What happens to your body language when your underarms are cared for? It shows. Our new Dove Advanced Care formula is effective and kind to skin, leaving underarms cared for and you more confident and carefree.
story that is emerging, that seems to be at the heart of the criminal case against Mr. Giuliani, if the contours of the search warrants are any guide, is basically that while Trump was president, and Mr. Giuliani was working as his lawyer, he marketed himself abroad. He marketed himself to various corrupt Pauls and oligarchs in Ukraine, advertising, in effect, that as President Trump's lawyer, somebody with President Trump's ear, he could deliver U.S. government action. He could, in fact, deliver something that corrupt Pauls and oligarchs in Ukraine would very much like. He could arrange to get rid of Marie Yovanovitch, this U.S. ambassador, who was known to be a fierce warrior against corruption. The ongoing question, and the interesting question in terms of Mr. Giuliani's legal liability here, is whether he was essentially selling that to these various guys in Ukraine for something in return. I mean, he'd get rid of the anti-corruption U.S. ambassador. She was always in the way of all these things these guys wanted to do. But in exchange, these various dudes who wanted that in Ukraine had a sort of menu of things they could pay. They could hire or pay Rudy and Company, including other American lawyers and Rudy associates who all fit into the clown car with him. They could pay. They could or direct money toward as a consultant. Rudy and his associates. And these Ukrainians who wanted the U.S. ambassador ousted could also, in effect, pay by delivering to Mr. Giuliani anti-Joe Biden political ammunition from Ukraine to benefit the Trump re-election campaign. Now, in the case of one particular oligarch, the story told by Lev Parnas, one of Mr. Giuliani's associates who worked with him on the scheme, who's now under indictment by the 7th District of New York. In the case of one particular Ukrainian oligarch whose name has surfaced in a lot of these recent reports this week since Giuliani's home and office were raided, in the case of this one oligarch, the deal was a little different. This was an oligarch named Dmitry Firtash, who himself is under U.S. indictment on multiple felony corruption charges. The U.S. Justice Department has for years been trying to extradite him to the U.S. to face trial on these multiple felonies. In Lev Parnas' telling, the deal offered to Mr. Firtash was that in exchange for helping generate anti-Joe Biden political ammunition to be used in the 2020 election to benefit Donald Trump, his reward would be help with William Barr and the Justice Department under Donald Trump to help keep him from being extradited to the United States to further delay or indeed derail his U.S. prosecution. If that was the offered quid pro quo, that creates all sorts of interesting implications, both for Mr. Giuliani in terms of what he was offering, what he and his associates were sort of selling to these guys in Ukraine, but also what they said they could deliver in exchange. If they can deliver action by the U.S. Justice Department or lack of action by the U.S. Justice Department, then people inside the U.S. Justice Department who are willing to effectuate that for them as part of this scheme, well, maybe they're going to be in the crosshairs here too. Everybody involved here, from Mr. Giuliani and Mr. Firtash on down, everybody involved denies every imaginable kind of wrongdoing in this story, suffice to say. But the fact remains that some of these deliverables were delivered. U.S. Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch was in fact fired as a result of this smear campaign run against her by Rudy Giuliani and his cast of characters. She was fired by Mike Pompeo. Mr. Pompeo, would you like to talk about your role in effectuating that deliverable as part of this scheme? I mean, the indicted oligarch, Dmitry Firtash, he did, in fact, have his case brought to the U.S. Justice Department at the highest levels for what appears to have been a sympathetic hearing, and in fact, Mr. Firtash still hasn't been extradited to the United States to face trial on those multiple, now long-standing felony corruption charges. And in terms of deliverables, well, Mr. Giuliani did drag home a whole bunch of ginned-up fake allegations against Joe Biden and his family that were designed to hurt him in the election. Interestingly, and I think in a way that is it's part of the story that is too often overlooked. Where did Giuliani actually get those deliverables? Well, there were people in Ukraine who came forward to help Rudy with the anti-Biden political ammunition that Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani and certain members of Republican members of Congress and conservative media outlets would in fact use to try to damage Biden's chances in the election. The people who came forward in Ukraine to help Giuliani actually get that stuff, develop that stuff, create TV shows about that stuff, do interviews about that stuff, do podcasts been sanctioned by the U.S. government within the past year as agents of the Kremlin, as agents of the Russian Federation, who were part of an active Russian intelligence-directed effort to mess with the U.S. election in 2020, just as Russian intelligence messed with our election in 2016. There wasn't like a real surprise. To Giuliani, at least. The Washington Post reported last night that Mr. Giuliani was warned in advance by the FBI that the people he was in contact with and trying to work with this on were connected to Russian intelligence. He was given a defensive briefing by the FBI in 2019 that he was being used, or that he was part of, a Russian intelligence operation targeting the U.S. election. After getting that defensive briefing, he went ahead with it anyway. Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.
What happens to your body language when your underarms are looking for? It shows. Our new Dove Advanced Care Formula is effective and kind to skin, leaving underarms cared for and feeling more confident and carefree.
We are going to start at this embassy. The embassy, this one is a big one. It is fully staffed. There's a lot of different directorates. There is, for example, a whole division of cultural affairs. They've got multiple military attachés. They've got a Navy attaché, an Air Force attaché. They've got a drug enforcement attaché. They've got a law enforcement attaché. They've got the people who run consular affairs, just like, folks getting visas and stuff. There's even, in this embassy, there's even an attaché specifically for fish. The fisheries attaché is named Mr. Oleg Vladimirovich Rykov. So, if you are a Russian fish with a problem that needs fixing by your government, Oleg is your man in D.C., the fish minister. But if your issue is economic in nature, you should know that this embassy, which is the Russian embassy in D.C., the economic section of the Russian embassy recently got a new guy put in charge of the economic section. And the new guy at the economic section was brought in under some clouds of suspicion concerning the old guy. The old guy who got shipped out last summer, was Mikhail Kalugin. Kalugin? Forgive me. My Russian pronunciation is as good as my fashion sense. I'm sure I'm butchering it, but it looks to me like Kalugin. Now, it's important to, the reason I'm stressing that, it's important to know how his name is spelled. Because if you don't spell his name right, that creates a little bit of a Google problem around the story. Because when this guy, the head of the economic section at the Russian embassy in Washington, D.C., when he turned up in that sketchy, uncorroborated dossier of alleged Russian dirt on Donald Trump, his name was misspelled in the dossier. They flopped a couple of the vowels around, so he was spelled Kulugin instead of Kalugin. And so, if, like me, you set Google News alerts on names that popped up in that dossier, that created a problem following the story because the name was misspelled in the dossier. Other than that misspelling, though, it screwed up my research for days. Other than the misspelling, the reference in the dossier actually made sense. He was described in the dossier as a high-ranking Russian diplomat in Washington. And the reference to him was a really important one. So this is from page 22 of this sketchy dossier. It says this, quote, senior Russian diplomat withdrawn from Washington embassy on account of potential exposure in U.S. presidential election operations. And then on the following page, it elaborates, quote, as a prophylactic measure, a leading Russian diplomat, Mikhail Kulugin, he means Kalugin, Mikhail, the head of the economic section of the embassy, quote, was withdrawn from Washington on short notice because Moscow feared his heavy involvement in the U.S. election operation, including the so-called veterans pensions ruse reported previously. His heavy involvement in the U.S. election operation would be exposed in the media. So, this senior Russian diplomat working at the Russian embassy, That reference to the pension ruse reported previously, that's a reference to the alleged means by which the Russian government paid for this operation. Right? That did actually have to pay for it, right? It's about the way they got cash to pay hackers and other operatives to do the grunt labor of this Russian election attack. I mean, what we know of the Russian attack on our election, Russian efforts to try to elect Donald Trump president, it did not seem to be a super labor-intensive process. It wasn't like an industrial process. But you do need people to do the work. You do need, for example, people building and running the online bots and repeaters, right? That were
I know.
giving ginned up fake Bible status to negative news about Hillary Clinton and positive news about Donald Trump, right? So, I mean, you do actually have to involve some people, and you probably do have to pay some folks. And the allegation here from the dossier was that this guy working in a very senior position at the Russian embassy, he was basically the paymaster for this operation. And the allegation from the dossier is that he was withdrawn from the embassy, withdrawn from the Russian embassy in Washington, sent back to Moscow on short notice because the Russians were worried that he was going to be exposed, right? That he was a risk. It seems like their idea, if this proves out, was that if there was ever going to be a real investigation into what Russia did here, this guy in this high-ranking position at the embassy with this important role, sort of a centralized role in the scheme, he was just kind of too big a breadcrumb, right, to leave out there for investigators. So they had to get him back to Moscow, get him out of Washington. So that part of the dossier is September 14th last year. And you have heard me say it, you have heard everybody say it. This is an uncorroborated dossier. It is a sheaf of unproven allegations, and some of those allegations are too lurid to make even veiled jokes about them on basic cable. But you know what? Not all of it is just lurid stuff of a personal nature. This guy from the embassy, Mikhail Kalugin, he really did get called home from the Russian embassy in D.C. in August. And now he really is back in Moscow. McClatchy's had some really good reporters on this beat in recent weeks. They failed this embassy guy in Moscow. They got him to do sort of an angry short email interview with them. He denied everything. He called it all fake news. But like, two people with knowledge of a multi-agency U.S. investigation into the Kremlin's meddling in the presidential election have told us that indeed, Mikhail Kalugin was under scrutiny when he departed. So, honestly, none of us really know holistically what you think about this dossier. But here's one concrete, checkable part of it. This guy really did work as a senior diplomat in the Russian embassy in D.C., and he really did get summoned back to Moscow while nobody expected him to. Reportedly, while U.S. investigators were examining his potential role in the scheme of the Russian government to mess up our election. That's in the dossier. That seems to have happened in real life. At least the checkable parts did that. He had served in the embassy apparently for 6 years, but then yank. And of course, he denies having any role in this scheme. All the Russians deny that there even was such a scheme. And it's possible that he was yanked this past summer just as a part of a normal rotation. It was time for him to go. It's also possible that the Russians felt like they needed to get him out. And think about their reasoning behind that, right? Because he was a senior diplomat at their embassy. They didn't have to worry about any criminal liability for him, right? He would have diplomatic immunity. He's a senior diplomat serving in the embassy. No matter what the U.S. might have ever wanted to charge him with, he'd have immunity. I mean, if he was, theoretically, the paymaster for foreign agents hacking into the Democratic Party and otherwise undermining America's presidential election, and that was found to be a crime in this country, he couldn't be convicted of that in the United States because of his diplomatic immunity. They wouldn't have to worry about him being personally liable if he was involved in this. Now that he's back in Moscow, well, there's two implications of that, right? Two consequences of that. Now that he's back in Moscow and he's no longer in D.C., if there were ever criminal charges brought against him, conveniently, Russia does not have an extradition treaty, right? So they've got immunity for him as a diplomatic official in the United States. Back home in Russia, they don't have to extradite anybody to the United States. So in terms of his personal liability, protecting him, in no sense is he in any sort of danger, right? In no sense is he looking at any sort of personal liability in this matter, even if he did what he is alleged to have done. But there's another implication of bringing him back to Moscow, right? There's one very clear advantage for the Russians in bringing him back to Moscow. If this guy did have a key role in running this operation against our presidential election, well, as long as he's in Moscow, he's outside the grasp of U.S. investigators. what just happened to our country. You know, what's going on with this incredible national security scandal that looms over our new presidency? How are we going to get to the bottom of this thing? Right? What's most important to all of us about this is that if this guy did have a key role in that scheme, while he is in Moscow, he's out of reach of U.S. investigators. And who are the U.S. investigators? Right? In terms of the investigation and what happened here, something really important happened today that is not heartening at all. We all know the basic history of this dossier, right? Reportedly, it had circulated around Washington, it had circulated among some journalists late last year. I never saw it before it was published. I had heard rumors about some of the things in it, but I am not one of the people who saw it, and I don't know many people who say they did see it before BuzzFeed published it. But it was apparently out there. In early January, it was reported by CNN that the FBI briefed Donald Trump and briefed President Obama on a list of allegations against Donald Trump and his campaign concerning Russia. That initial report from CNN didn't exactly say what these allegations were, but within 24 hours, BuzzFeed News published the dossier, this whole 35-page dossier. And it was a huge uproar at the time. Everybody, including BuzzFeed, admitted the dossier was all uncorroborated information. But you know what? It didn't end there. And that ends up being really important for what happened today. Because quietly, over the next few weeks after this thing was published by BuzzFeed, such an uproar, there have been multiple reports that some of the information in this dossier is bearing out under further investigation. This thing didn't just get published and then go away. U.S. investigators have been looking into this. And bits and pieces of what's reported in this dossier are turning out to be true and reported and checkable. I mean, there is this mysterious recall to Moscow of the economic section chief for the Russian embassy in D.C. And McClatchy reporting that when he left, yes, he was under investigation for his potential role in this Russian operation against our election. Okay. There's also a report from CNN recently and from the New Yorker last week that we highlighted just the other night on this show. Look, headline. U.S. investigators corroborate some aspects of the Russia dossier. Well, intercepts do confirm that some of the conversations described in the dossier took place between the same individuals on the same days and from the same locations as detailed in the dossier. Quote, corroboration based on intercepted communications has given U.S. intelligence and law enforcement greater confidence in the credibility of some aspects of the dossier. And here's an intelligence official speaking to the New Yorker. Quote, they are continuing to chase down stuff from the dossier, and at its core, a lot of it is bearing out. Okay, well, if parts of this dossier are bearing out, if investigators are finding that in specific allegations, specific conversations, describe specific anecdotes, at least some of them check out when they double check this work. Well, it's maybe worth focusing again on what the point of this is, on what the bottom line is of this dossier, particularly given what happened today in London. Because forget all of the salacious personal stuff. Forget all the stuff that made the White House so mad when this was published. Right? The bottom line of this dossier, the bottom line allegation, the point of it, is that the Trump campaign didn't just benefit from Russia interfering in our presidential campaign. The point of this is they colluded. They helped. They were in on it. Right? The money quote from this dossier is the operation had been conducted with the full knowledge of Trump and senior members of his campaign team. That's basically what this whole dossier alleges, that the Trump folks were in on it. There were multiple people close to Trump involved in the Trump campaign who were in contact with the Russian government about the Russian government's attacks on Hillary Clinton while those attacks were happening, while Russia was waging these attacks. And overall, yes, we still have to describe this as a sheaf of uncorroborated allegations, but little pieces supporting that bottom line thesis really do keep falling in line, right? I mean, think about what we've learned just in the last few weeks. Michael Flynn resigned, right? Buried in the revelations about National Security Advisor Michael Flynn resigning, right? Him having contact with the Russian government that he did not own up to, and lying about what the content was of his communications. Buried in those revelations was not just the fact that he talked to the Russian government during the transition, but he also had multiple contacts with the Russian government during the campaign, right? During the campaign. What was he talking to them about during the campaign when the Russians were hacking our election? Explicitly referenced in the dossier is a meeting by Trump campaign foreign policy advisor Carter Page. A meeting between him and a very senior Russian official in July 2016. That's just confirmed by the Trump campaign today. Wednesday night last week, the New York Times reported that the British and the Dutch, American allies, including the British and the Dutch, have given information to U.S. investigators about not just intercepted communications, but in-person meetings during the presidential campaign between people close to Vladimir Putin, including Russian government officials, and people close to Trump. They were allegedly holding in-person meetings in European cities, and European intelligence agencies reported on those meetings to the U.S. They reported on those meetings between Trump folks and Putin folks during the campaign. And that news, fairly explosive news, from the New York Times, that was last Wednesday night. It was overshadowed in the news cycle because a couple hours after the New York Times posted that article, the Washington Post broke the news that Attorney General Jeff Sessions himself had taken at least 2 meetings with Russian government officials that he had not disclosed, even when he was asked about it under oath during his confirmation hearings. And so, yeah, it's understandable that those earlier allegations from earlier in the evening got overshadowed, but the Sessions thing, how's that resolving? That led to a whole big drama that continues today about Sessions recusing himself as Attorney General, recusing himself from overseeing any investigations into the Trump campaign and its contacts with Russia. Well, once again, we're sort of in this situation with this story in particular and the Trump administration in general, where it's sort of best to treat it like a silent movie a little bit. Ignore the personal stuff. Ignore all the kinetic fighting about this stuff in Washington. Right? Get back to the main point here. Get back to the big point here. Get back to the challenging the republic stuff. Right? The main allegation here, the thing everybody is most worried about, which is the bottom line allegation of this unproven dossier, is that Russia didn't just attack our election. They did so with the knowledge of and support of the Trump campaign. That the Trump folks were in on it, that they knew what Russia was doing while they were doing it, and they continued meeting with Russians in knowledge of that activity during the time of the attack. So yeah, the Jeff Sessions drama and the recusal questions are interesting and will continue to be newsworthy. But look at the meeting that gave rise to the recusal, right? That meeting with Jeff Sessions and the Russian guy happened September 8th. What did they talk about? I mean, these were the headlines that week, right? This is the Washington Post. Started that week. U.S. investigating potential covert Russian plan to disrupt November elections. This was the biggest story in the country that week. And that's when Jeff Sessions took his meeting with a Russian government official. Did they talk about the biggest story in the country that week, which was about the Russian government and the Trump campaign, as they took that meeting as a representative of the Russian government and the Trump campaign? The allegation here, the bottom line allegation here, the worst case scenario is collusion, that the Trump folks were in on it. They were in communication with the Russians about this while the Russians were doing it. And yeah, Sessions is recused. You still have an open question as to whether there will be an independent investigation. Today was the confirmation hearing of the man nominated to be Deputy Attorney General. Sessions has recused himself from the Trump-Russia investigations. It would be his Deputy Attorney General, if he's confirmed, to be overseeing what we're told there's several ongoing Justice Department investigations into links between the Trump campaign and the Russians. The nominee, Rob Rosenstein, said would not be to handing those duties off to an independent special prosecutor. Even though if he decides to do this himself, that puts him in a weird position, right? I mean, if he decides he's going to personally oversee these investigations, it'll not just be him investigating the Trump campaign, this acquisition, it'll be him overseeing an investigation into his own boss, Jeff Sessions. Since Sessions personally is implicated, Sessions himself is implicated in the story, and the timeline of his Russian contacts needs explaining as part of any looking into this. And so the independence of the FBI investigations, the Justice Department investigations, right? If you're worried about the FBI investigations and the other DOJ investigations here, if you're worried that those may not cut the mustard in terms of aggression and independence, well, what are the other investigations? There's these intelligence committees in Congress, right, that are also leading investigations. One of them in the House, headed by a Trump campaign transition official, who just announced today that they will hold their first public hearing on this issue on March 20th. The other investigation in the Senate is headed by a member of the National Security Advisory Committee to the Donald Trump campaign. But that brings us to the shooting star that went off in this story today. We're here for the heavy blowers and the wind triggers with a patented Senate Intelligence
It'd
Committee
be a
and
blast.
who was part of the Trump campaign. NBC reported that that committee was interested in talking to the author of the
Christopher, what's his name?
the author of the dossier, former MI6 officer, which prepares this sheaf of information, first for private clients and then reportedly he brought it to the FBI himself in the summer of last year when he was so disturbed by what he concluded about collusion between the Trump folks and the Russians. Again, what he found was evidence. What he says he
I
found
read
was
some of it.
evidence not just of Russia attacking the U.S. presidential election, but one party in that election, the Trump campaign, helping, going along with it, colluding, being part of it. And that is way worse allegation than just the Russians attacking our election, right? Or the Trump campaign having inexplicable contacts with Russians that they keep forgetting. The allegation of collusion is very, 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 very serious. Right? I mean, it's sort of as serious as it gets. It's a whole different ballgame than there's something mysterious here. Right? And again, the allegations in this dossier, we have to continue to describe them as
I thought this was current.
but toward the basic thesis of this dossier,
Christopherson.
The visit back in 2019 gave him a defensive briefing, as it's known in the trade, warning him that, quote, he was being targeted by a Russian intelligence influence operation as he sought to gather opposite. The visit back in 2019 gave him a defensive briefing, as it's known in the trade, warning him that, quote, he was being targeted by a Russian intelligence influence operation as he sought to gather opposition research on the Biden family. The U.S. government later made the warnings even more explicit, releasing a public statement last year saying that one of the people Giuliani had been dealing with, Ukrainian parliamentarian Andrei Derkach, is a Russian intelligence asset. Giuliani's lawyer tells NBC News his client says the FBI briefing never happened. Earlier on this network, the other Trump personal lawyer interviewed by the feds predicted that things could get difficult for Giuliani.
One of the things that you're talking about is, of course, Marie Yovanovitch. That is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what they're looking for when it comes to Rudy Giuliani. The fact that the FBI now has his cell phones, they have his computer and other information, you could rest assured that that's not specifically what, or that's not the only thing that they're looking for. They have him. And so if he's looking to protect himself so that he doesn't end up
Fair sex with multiple women as well as a girl who was 17 at the time. The letter was written after Greenberg, who was under federal indictment, asked Roger Stone to help him secure a pardon from then-President Donald Trump. NBC News has not seen or verified this letter. There have been multiple reports that Congressman Gates is under investigation for possible sex trafficking. Federal prosecutors have not charged Gates or confirmed their inquiry. That investigation came out of another one, into Greenberg in Florida, who's been indicted on a number of charges, including but not limited to sex trafficking. His lawyer has signaled he is willing to cooperate with prosecutors. Today, a PR firm for Congressman Gates, who has previously denied all these allegations, responded to the Daily Beast reporting with a statement that read, quote, taking a pardon. I have seen no substantiation or actual proof of any of the wild accusations he has made against Congressman Gates. Meanwhile, back in the world of real life that has nothing to do with Trump or his associates, Joe Biden is starting his second 100 days in office with a full court press for funding his over $2 trillion jobs and infrastructure plan. Today, he did one of his favorite things. He rhapsodized about trains. He was trackside in Philadelphia to help Amtrak commemorate its 50th anniversary. As a senator, Biden famously commuted by Amtrak train every day between D.C. and his home in Delaware.
I've been riding an Amtrak for almost as long as there's been an Amtrak. Transit is part of the infrastructure. And like the rest of our infrastructure, we're way behind the rest of the world right now. You need to remember, we're in competition with the rest of the world.
White House today reached a milestone in its vaccination drive. Over 100 million people in the U.S. have now been fully vaccinated, almost 40% of the nation's adults, and nearly double what the nation had registered even at the end of March. With that accomplished, now the effort is about vaccinating the hesitant. The coronavirus crisis continues to deepen in India, with treatment almost impossible to find, vaccines equally scarce. Starting Tuesday, travel from India to the U.S. will be restricted, a move the White House says it made on the advice of the CDC. These restrictions will not apply to U.S. citizens. The administration is also about to launch a significant foreign policy move. U.S. troops have started their withdrawal from Afghanistan, ending a 20-year mission, our longest war. It comes 10 years after the raid that resulted in the death of Osama bin Laden. It's a lot, and with that, let's bring in our leadoff guests on a Friday night as we bring this week to a close. Jeremy Bash, former chief of staff at CIA and the Pentagon, former chief counsel to the House Intel Committee. Eugene Daniels, White House correspondent for Politico, co-author of each day's edition of the Politico Playbook. And Dr. Kavita Patel back with us as well. Clinical physician, former senior policy aide during the Obama administration. She's for good reason among our public health experts. Additionally, she is a non-resident fellow at Brookings. Well, good evening and welcome to you all. Jeremy, I'd like to begin with you, with the former personal lawyer for the former president. What does it seem to you that the feds, and this is coming off Michael Cohen's comments, the only other personal lawyer to have been raided by the feds, what does it seem to you they're looking for from Rudy?
Well, federal agents, Brian, it appears, are looking at two things. One is the national security threat posed by foreign governments who would interfere in U.S. elections by spreading disinformation, and Rudy Giuliani was clearly a conduit of that disinformation, largely emanating from Russia through agents in the Ukraine. But the second thing that they're looking at is whether or not criminal laws were potentially violated when Rudy Giuliani lobbied the Trump administration effectively on behalf of Ukrainian officials who wanted Trump to fire the U.S. ambassador in Kiev because she was being very rough on corruption in Ukraine. And I think, the theory of federal agents, according to these media reports, is that if Rudy Giuliani was being paid either in cash or in dirt, on Biden or others, then effectively Rudy Giuliani was illegally lobbying the United States government on behalf of a foreign government without registering. And that's something that's gotten people in hot water, and it's even landed them in prison. So Rudy Giuliani, it appears, is either the target or a subject of full-blown criminal investigation.
Jeremy Bash looks a little different, but he sounds different.
And Jeremy, a quick follow.
Madison's believing paid to survive, and managing COPD is just about better breathing. But flares can cause permanent damage to you.
And Jeremy, a quick follow-up. If Rudy did get that FBI warning and still palled around with these guys, the Russian and Ukrainian types, I'm assuming that would be very bad.
It would be, because effectively the defensive warning says, hey, you may not realize this, Mayor Giuliani, but you're being used. Then if he goes ahead and continues his activities, well then he's not just unwitting, he's in on it. And I think that's a huge red flag.
I honestly don't think that's Jeremy Bash. He was one of the CIA's, former CIA's, I guess, that I was a fan of. Same with John Brennan. I think it was O. Brennan, and then it got changed to Brennan.
You heard President Biden tell our colleague at NBC News, Greg Melvin, that
I mean, I was
he
a
did
fan,
not
but
know ahead of time
they
that
took it
this
away
raid
pretty
was
hard
happening.
here.
And I think that's
He and
exactly
Dana
what we're
Bash.
going to continue to hear from this White House as the DOJ investigates anyone, right? They want to keep out of the political fray. They don't. President Biden promised to depoliticize the DOJ and the investigations in this country. And the thing that I keep hearing over and over from sources that I'm talking to is that a lawyer being raided like this, and we all know this, is not typical, right? There are questions of client-lawyer confidentiality, and then when the lawyer's working for a president or a former president even, they would typically be even more careful, right?
right? So there are so many layers to getting a warrant like this, and so this White House, they're watching, but they are not engaging in a lot of these things, and that is the kind of arms length that they want to keep the DOJ at, especially when it's something as politically fraught and as politically sensitive as someone like Rudy Giuliani.
Yeah, and as you noted, the idea of an independent Justice Department is going to take some getting used to, coming on the heels of the Barr era. Dr. Patel, to you, I think any American with any humanity feels absolutely helpless watching what is unfolding in India. At the same time, we had a very proud milestone today, 100 million Americans fully vaccinated, not just half, but a full dose. Let's talk about the illness that is striking India. Is there any chance that India of 2021 could be the China of 2020, in that these virulent variants, it's hard to say, could find their way around those already vaccinated?
Yeah, Brian, you're hitting exactly on the point that many of us are concerned as we're seeing not one, not two, but multiple concerning variants just in India that have been identified. And of course that means that there's still a huge landscape that has not been identified. And I think it highlights, while we're making such progress in the United States, and the Biden team is certainly not declaring any sort of victory yet, although they should be proud of the milestone, they see what looms large. Not just in India, Brian, we're seeing concerning trends in parts of Latin America. We're seeing rises in places that have been incredibly vigilant, like Japan. And I would just add that, India is a very large country, but there are neighboring countries, Pakistan, Nepal, and they have very little infrastructure, even worse and less so than India. And so this is exactly the issue that is going to dominate 2021, not just with India kind of being a canary in the coal mine, but it's going to pose challenges about what the U.S.'s kind of stance is on helping accelerate the global vaccination pace. And on top of that, what are we going to do if we kind of log down at about 50 to 60% of our population and see spikes like we are? We're seeing some rising cases, although we're doing great in terms of cases, right? 17% decline in the last week, which is great progress. We're seeing increases in some spots, Oregon, Arizona, and that a lot of that has to do, again, with the remainder of the population that not only needs to get vaccinated, but these are younger people that are turning positive and are still getting sick. And unfortunately, at 800 deaths in the last 24 hours, we still have people dying from COVID-19 in the United States.
Eugene, a question to you and your beat on India. A lot of folks did not understand when they heard the travel ban today. These travel bans for a lot of families can just seem so draconian and can force families with, urgent air travel needs into crisis. People were asking today, if you're going to do it, why wait till Tuesday? I think it was to give people time, and obviously there's a carve-out for U.S. citizens. Was there any pushback at the administration on that front that you were aware of today?
I haven't found that in any of my reporting, but what we have found is that, when these happen, there's a lot of conversation about the impact, especially on American citizens that are in that country. Like you're saying, making sure that there's some time for people to be able to get back, or get, to get here, if they were already planning on and with their travel plans. And I think this is an administration that they're a little bit more, I guess, careful in their planning when they're doing things like this than the last administration, because they know that the blowback and the impact of those policies and changes, like you said, they feel draconian. People have a hard time understanding. But what we're seeing in India, the doctor was just saying, like, everyone is concerned about it, right, in this White House, because this race against the closer and closer to that bright light at the end of the tunnel, as it's been put to me multiple times by members of the administration. And that is something that they're constantly focused on. How can we make sure that's happening? But then, not just about America, there's this kind of global vaccination effort that we as a country are going to have to engage in and possibly lead on. And that is also what we've seen. You didn't really see a lot of people talking about India until it got really bad. And then the administration promised to send vaccines. We've sent N95 masks, sent oxygen and things like that over there. And those are the kinds of things that people in that country and other countries are going to need as the variants start popping up. Because frankly, a lot of people around the country, around the planet, in this country, have let their guard down. You know, we have been dealing with this for more than a year. It's some longer in other places around the world. And I think that part of it is concerning for health experts that I've been talking to in the administration and outside of it.
I hope we're loading C-17s with all the vaccines and oxygen we as a nation can spare. And Dr. Patel, if all that wasn't scary enough, this is from Politico, Eugene's employer. They write about Biden's next pandemic challenge, getting Americans to accept the virus. Containment, not eradication, is the most realistic goal. Public health experts say the coronavirus is here for the long haul. The challenge for Biden, his response team, and state health officials will be managing the rolling series of outbreaks, possibly driven by more dangerous virus variants. And Doctor, indeed, this comes off your last comments.
Yeah, and Brian, what we hope is that we go from a pandemic to what's called an endemic, and we have this kind of containment so that we see the virus, remember, this virus will do what it has to do to survive. And so while we have people who are unvaccinated, and as the virus mutates, that will be our challenge. It will mean that just like with the flu, just like with measles, Brian, we still have cases. We don't get front page headline news every day about them. And I think the American public is going to have kind of a psychological reaction. What is the appropriate number of COVID cases and deaths and hospitalizations that we are willing to tolerate? When will we feel comfortable, even with CDC guidance, Brian, to have kind of quote-unquote normal activity? It's going to be a very difficult transition. It already is, as you're seeing from the outside mask kind of debate that happened this last several weeks. So I do think this is Biden's challenge. I think it's why he's had to have and has shown incredible discipline. I think where things are going to potentially be out of his control are exactly what happens beyond our borders. He can't control it, but now we're going to have to be a leader and
What do I do with it now?
Advises the parties about what can and can't go through reconciliation, and also rules on how many times you can use the reconciliation route. There was a view at one point that, well, I won't go into it. It gets quite complicated, but the parliamentarian has said essentially Democrats can use reconciliation more often than they might have previously tried, and so that is a route open to the president. So then the question becomes, can President Biden convince conservative senators Manchin and Sinema to go along with his ideas about infrastructure and taxation and those kinds of things? But that might be easier than finding 10 Republicans to meet that 60-vote filibuster threshold.
Well, let me turn to another topic here, John. On Saturday, the U.S. will begin withdrawing the remaining troops from Afghanistan, with a full removal expected by September 11th. What could this mean for the future of Afghanistan?
Well, it depends on who you talk to. I mean, there are both Democrats and Republicans who say essentially it means the Taliban could overrun Afghanistan the way it did before 20 years ago, before 9/11, that you have an extremist Taliban in charge of Afghanistan again, which creates destabilization and is a haven for terrorism. Now, President Biden has overruled his military leaders and said, I don't want endless wars, and he's got some considerable support for him in his own party. But then the question is, what does monitoring mean when the U.S. is out of there and NATO is out of there? When does the U.S. feel like it's important to get back involved, and what are the terms? It'll be an ongoing and fascinating challenge for the Biden administration tending to the Afghanistan after U.S. troops withdraw.
And finally, John, you will be in the anchor chair for the next few months for Face the Nation. What can we expect on this weekend show?
Well, on this weekend show, we're going to talk to Ron Klain, the president's chief of staff. We're going to talk to him about what you and I have been talking about. What's going to pass? How's it going to pass? How do they read the country? And how is the president going to get this ambitious agenda actually going? And where are the possible areas of compromise? We're then also going to talk to Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina. He, of course, gave the Republican response to the president's speech this last Wednesday. On a host of issues, we'll talk to him: taxation, spending, common ground, if there is any, between the parties. But also, he's the Republican lead on the police reform bills being discussed in Congress. Is there any movement there? It had been pretty much stalled. But he says he's got a new idea and is maybe making some headway. So we'll talk to him about the specifics of that.
Right, all the pivotal players on all the pivotal topics. John Dickerson for us. John, great to see you again. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
A reminder, you can stream Face the Nation every Sunday. It airs at 10:30 a.m. Eastern on CBS, and later at 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. right here on CBSN. Democratic Congresswoman Sherry Bustos of Illinois is retiring. Her decision is considered one of the party's first surprises ahead of what's expected to be a contentious midterm cycle. Bustos is the former head of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. She led efforts to recapture the House in 2018, but ultimately faced scrutiny for congressional Democrats' performance last election. Bustos did not say what she plans to do when she leaves office. Many U.S. restaurants are starting to operate as usual, but some owners say they're struggling to find employees. Here's Nancy Chen with the story.
Business is back at the Loft Restaurant in Paulsville, Washington. Owners C.B. Colbaines and Michael Pinkholz are serving up meals to a growing number of diners. But there's a key ingredient missing: workers.
This is the hardest it has ever been in my 30 years in this industry to find anyone to come and cook.
Establishments nationwide are facing staffing shortages at all positions. The mill in upstate New York is offering gift cards to customers who help find new employees.
Our biggest fear
U.S. death toll past 225,000.
Do you trust the Postal Service to deliver your vote?
I never have.
Millions probably of illegal people voting.
A lot of dead people.
Stop inspiring people to commit potential acts of violence. Some are going to get killed. Very important. Vote, vote, vote. Everything that we fight for is on the ballot.
We are witnessing history in what can only be described as a national disgrace.
We can resolve our differences non-violently. We need to get that faith back. Download the free CBS News app to watch.
What's up, y'all? I'm Cody Rigsby. I'm going to show you a fun little circuit that you might see in class. We're going to start with some forward lunges. You can do this with weights or without, just giving your best. 3, 2, 1. Bring those weights up to your shoulders. Squeeze your butt, rib cage down, press into the sky. Drop those weights in 3, 2, and 1. Let's drop those weights.
Your password.
Cody Rigsby and Google Fight Bootcamp and so much more on Peloton.
You have 2 unheard messages in your mailbox. First unheard message sent yesterday at 10:56 a.m. Horrible. I couldn't please return my call. Message deleted. Next message sent yesterday at 4:21 p.m. Hello, this is Humana. Calling to ask Laura Lambert some questions about a recent healthcare experience. Please call us back toll free at 1-877.
Now we're able to still connect with our community. We can still support.
Alright, this video is going to be how to find your Bluetooth device after you've already hit forget this device. So let's say, I have my, I'll click on this one right here. I hit the I and I hit this forget this device button. So if I hit forget this device, it'll forget the device forever. And so there might become a time where I want to remember it, so how do I go about doing that? The way you do that is you actually need to reset your network settings. So if I go back to settings and I go to general and I go to reset, right here I see reset all settings, erase all content and settings, reset network settings. So I actually want to go to reset network settings, and it's just going to ask me, okay, do I want to reset network settings? I hit yes. Click that, and then I just wait. Alright, so now we've loaded back up. We go here, and now if I go to my settings, Bluetooth, I should see the device that I was unable to connect with, or the one that I forgot. So that's about it. That's all you have to do.
moto.
I'm gonna stop recording and upload this.